which is how the Israeli people, so smart, so sophisticated, so savvy, with a prime minister who understands American public opinion. If I were running for president, I'd hire Bibi as my pollster. I mean, he understands America. How Israel allowed themselves to lose control of American public opinion, which is, I think, is as anti-Israel as it's ever been. People can attribute it to anti-Semitism. They can attribute it to the war and the unpopularity of Israel's conduct. But it still makes no sense to me. So I want to talk about how it happened and then what the solutions are. And of course, there's this now famous memo from Charlie Kirk in which he laid out, as well as I've seen anyone do, here's what needs to be done. And Charlie's thesis, which I share, is a lot of it's just about basic blocking and tackling. It's just about the basics of Israel failed to devote sufficient expertise and effort to trying to push back on lies. Because I know what you think, because I know, and I know it's true, almost everything that Israel's hung around their neck is false. Not everything. Some of the things they did, including sometimes killing innocent people, they should be held accountable.
As happens in war.
As happens in war. And it is a true fact, as I know you know, and say as more than I do, they fight the war with one hand tied behind their back because they know that if they are not the most careful combatants ever, they will pay a price. So that's my big prelude. How did this happen? How did we come, forget Israel, how did the United States, the left and the right, and many other people, how did we go from Israel being our best friend to public opinion polling that every time it comes out, I do a double take how unpopular Israel is in the United States now? How did that happen?
So I want to break this apart because I think that the public opinion challenges Israel faces on the right are not nearly as alarming or stark in the U.S. As Israel faces on the left. I think people are. I'm not saying I'm not concerned by what's happening on the right in the U.S., but I think there's an overreaction to it. By the way, there's an overreaction among Israelis I speak to what's happening on the right here. I think part of the problem with Israeli officials who are following public opinion here on the right is that they get their information about the U.S. politics largely online. So if you follow the debate online on the right, those on the right with the biggest megaphones are saying things that, while again are noteworthy, are not necessarily reflective of where the GOP primary electorate public opinion is. I'll give you a very specific example. A friend of mine is doing polling right now for Republican candidates, statewide candidates in New Hampshire, Minnesota, and South Carolina. And he has put a few questions over the last few months, so 3 very different states, 3 very different electorates. He's put a series of questions about Israel in each of those races, in each of his surveys. And he says, yeah, public opinion among GOP primary voters in these 3 states have dipped a little bit, but it's nothing like you would think if you watch, if you follow all this online. That he says still the GOP primary electorate is still overwhelmingly pro-Israel. And to compare it to what's happening on the left here, it's like, in one case you have a cold, in the other case you have terminal cancer, and you say, isn't it a shame that everybody's sick? It's like they're 2 different worlds. Okay, so I think it's important to But I agree with your central premise. By the way, sorry, go ahead.
But let me just say, we'll stay with the right, and then we can talk about the left if you want, or just the overall situation. And I want to move relatively quickly to what you think the solutions are, because I don't want to blame you and Netanyahu exclusively. But I'm not being sarcastic when I say I think you both need to do some soul searching here, because you both are so sophisticated about these issues, and it is on your watch. And I love you. I'm not holding you fully accountable, but I want you need to have done more. Because you're able to do it. So on the right, you're right. The numbers aren't as bad, but the reason why people in Israel respond to the onlineness of it is because those people have tens of thousands of audience. So they're the loudest and the angriest, and they represent the interesting story because of change. But it's not an insignificant number of people, and their influence over members of Congress is not insignificant. So you're right. It's not the same on the right and the left, but any friend of Israel has to be alarmed at the level of influence anti-Semitic, anti-Israel voices have on the right, I believe.
Yeah. So I will say again, and I want to get to your central question. I do want to also say the issue on the right, to the extent it's a problem, I do think is more of a function of changing views on the right about U.S. foreign policy and the
Uh-huh.
U.S. role in the world. Whereas on the left, I do think there's something. I'm going to say it, something much more anti-Semitic going on. Whereas on the right, where we have seen a dip, it's not clear to me that it's actually motivated by the same thing. But look, let
But
me
you
just take a
can,
step
but
back.
just interrupt for that to say there are plenty of prominent voices on the right who say things that are cast as anti-Semitic. So
I
I agree with you. It's mostly about
I think it's important to draw a
isolationism.
distinction, even
Yeah.
within those voices. Some of them are expressing are using anti-Semitic dog whistles, and others are actually talking about what they're really talking about is a restrained role for U.S. for
I agree. I agree.
resources in the world,
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
and it sometimes gets blasted as anti-Semitic. So I just want to, anyways,
I agree.
this is a Talmudic debate we could have, but I do think these distinctions are important. Now I want to talk about how we got here. I'm going to point to a few factors. All right. One is Israel historically has always been bad about telling its story. It's always been bad about strategic communications. And it's partly because throughout its history, it has always been in some kind of form of warfighting mode. And when you're constantly in warfighting mode, trying to talk to them, as I have and others, about communications and telling their story, they treat it like the less important thing they'll get to when they have time. It's like trying to talk to someone about their cholesterol when they're in the middle of a knife fight. It's like, yeah, I know I got to deal with my cholesterol. I got to check, but I'm being stabbed right now. So let me just win the knife fight, and then I'll deal with communications. So they've never dealt with building the real infrastructure in the country. What do I mean by infrastructure? Really investing in it. Like the fact that, sorry, I can hear my dog. The fact that there are so many Israeli ambassadors around the world who are in capitals of countries where these ambassadors don't speak the language of that country is mind-blowing to me. Like, let's just start with like the basics. They don't have
Yeah.
people who can communicate. That's a big problem. Then the other point, which I think is key here, and I'm going to get to Netanyahu very specifically in a moment, is the Israeli government is dealing with two different audiences. We tend to focus on the audience here, the audience in the West, which rallied behind Israel by and large immediately after October 7th, right? Because they saw Israel as this, the victim, as the David in the story, not the Goliath, as the underdog, and there was this moment in many circles of rallying to Israel, and that changed the moment Israel went into Gaza and started fighting back. Like it changed like that. Now, what the Israelis will say is the audience we really care about is not the audience in the West. It's in the Middle East. And if our only image is we were attacked, we were massacred, we're the victim, we're the charity case, then we are roadkill. We will be roadkill in the region. And as ugly as what you've been seeing on TikTok screens and on television screens in the West, as ugly as you may find that, in the Middle East, it's not a problem for us. To the contrary, it shows that, we respond and don't mess around with us.
Yeah.
And we project military might and military strength. And we are a power in the region. So there is this inherent tension among Israeli officials about what message is more important when they're in the middle of a war. And I think many of them are far less sensitive to the demonization because they believe the only way to mollify the demonization is to come off as weak and the victim. And I think they argue that it hurts them in the region. Okay. Lastly, as it relates to Netanyahu, he has had a theory of the case for a number of years. The theory of his case was Israel needs economic might, which it has developed over the last couple of decades. I've written about this, about the startup scene, the innovation economy, that gave them extraordinary economic resources, created enormous wealth. They're one of the countries that has grown the fastest in terms of per capita GDP, really of any country in the OECD. A. B, once you get the economic might, that helps fund the military capabilities, which Israel has. And the combination of the economic might and the military might gives you geopolitical power. And the reality is everyone in the region and the world, as much as they will finger wag at you, will always respect the military and the economic power. And that's what gives you real diplomatic power. and you are positioning yourself from a position of strength. And that is ultimately, for instance, what Netanyahu thinks got them the Abraham Accords. And that's what got them on a path to normalization with Saudi Arabia, which I still think is on track. That these countries that normalized with Israel wanted to piggyback onto Israel's strength, not like, sign up for Israel's weakness. So Netanyahu's entire approach while he's been prime minister before October 7th is project strength, be strong, be a regional economic superpower, be a global technology superpower, and be a military and intelligence juggernaut. And that's when folks will rally to you. Now, in the middle of your war fighting, it's going to make people uncomfortable in the West for some time, but then the war fighting will stop. And it stopped yesterday. And then people, then memories will recede, people will forget about it, and they won't focus as much on the ugliness of war fighting. And Israel will kind of return to some state it was at before October 7th. Possibly you could argue even better, given the success of the operation against Iran and the pager attack, which Netanyahu would argue gives Israel this image of strength that various players will rally to. So that's how the Israelis would explain how they got in this jam, and how they'll get out of it. The one amendment I would make to it, talking to you, is, and Charlie talked about this, and you're talking about this, all that is fine, but it's not inconsistent with getting the basics done. And the basics are, I think this summer, Mark, things really turned. I mean, things were turning for a while, but this summer, Israel was hit with 3 horrendous stories. Each of one was a lie. Story 1 was that Israel was committing a genocide. It wasn't. Story 2 was Israel had orchestrated some mass famine, that there was mass starvation in Gaza. Not true. And 3, that Israel was intentionally targeting journalists that it knew were journalists and had no ties with Hamas. Also not true. And the 1, 2, 3 of those stories in the summer, I think the effect of those were horrendous for Israel over here. And everything I just said before I got to this point doesn't mean that Israel could not have, in a very systematic way, been confronting those 3 storylines to actually explain how and why the famine story is a lie. Is it defensive? Of course it's defensive to go explain why you're not starving people. But you still got to do it. You still have to have a resource center that releases like the basic facts and does press briefings and explains what's actually going on and how humanitarian aid is being distributed in Gaza and what's, and what's actually going on. And Israel's just doing none of it. And so the reality is it's not that complicated, what I'm talking about. The basics. No. The basics are not that complicated.
And Charlie laid out the basics too. And doing the basics, as you just said, it's not compatible with saying we want to be seen as the crazy people who will bite the head off of rats to defend our country, and we want to be seen as an economic power. And the cost of those 3 stories, because again, I know your view, those stories are false. They're just false, but they're treated in the West and in the United States as true, and they allow the enemies of Israel, the opponents of American role, and of course the hilarity is there was no American role. It wasn't like we were putting boots on the ground. Right. And people who are anti-Semitic. It allows all those people to say Israel's bad because they're genocidal famine causers who kill innocent reporters. Everybody, let me tell you about an organization. It's called the Vapor Technology Association. It's a group started nearly a decade ago to protect the rights of Americans who choose alternatives to smoking. And it's about the small businesses who have made a living with this technology. They support science-based policies and the rights of adults to make healthier choices. Did you know that many family-owned vape shops and manufacturers across the country are now under attack thanks to what are outdated Biden-era regulations that threaten to wipe out an entire industry? The Vapor Technology Association, also known as VTA, says businesses are being destroyed and people are losing their jobs. But the VTA says President Trump has a clear opportunity now to change all this and to protect Americans' right to make their own choices. Also to defend small businesses and restore a free and fair marketplace. Head over now to vaportechnology.org to learn more about the group and why they are leading the charge to support American innovation. And if their mission appeals to you, consider becoming a member when you get to the website. Again, that's vaportechnology.org, and tell them you heard about it here on Next Up.